Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. You know, everyone here knows that in my younger years, obviously I was left-leaning. I think the stats speak for themselves. The majority of college students, young, easily influenced, naive, ignorant minds, are quite susceptible to communist ideals when their ideas aren't effectively being challenged in the school system. But as you get older, you get more life experience, you research topics, you slowly start to see things differently and develop different ideas. And generally, with people's political trajectory moving away from the left, there's always one factor that you hear over and over again. Once you start learning a little bit about basic economics, it's impossible to be a leftist. You know, I've made a lot of friends in the finance world. A lot of my best friends studied finance. And the one thing that I notice about everybody who studies economics or finance, none of them identify as leftists, because the simple fact of the matter is, these leftoids are economically illiterate. It makes it impossible to stand on the same side as these individuals, because what they're saying generally makes no sense whatsoever, especially when you dig into the numbers. You can't spend all of this time learning about how delicate the economy is, understanding money and the way that it works, and then align yourself with leftoids who view money as monopoly money, funny money, and just want to endlessly spend and endlessly print money, and of course ask questions later. But the point is, the economic illiteracy of the far left is really what pushes people away. And let me show you guys exactly what I mean by that with a couple viral examples here. We've got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright folks, so when listening to these far leftists, the one thing that I notice all the time is that they just kind of invent things as they go. You know, when you're arguing with a teenager who just thinks they're so smart, but they don't have that repository of knowledge and understanding, and so they just kind of invent things. You know, they're crafty, they're smart kids, but pride takes over, and they want to win the argument, and they'll just say whatever comes to mind, whatever mental gymnastics they need to say to make themselves sound smart and like they know what they're talking about. This is what we see from leftoids all the time, and here's a perfect example from Sunny Hostin at ABC's The View.
Agree with you. Yeah. You know, inflation, what people, and I don't think people are educating themselves on it. Inflation is a worldwide problem, and the domestic problem of inflation is corporate greed. Corporations have made more money during and after the pandemic. They've raised their prices so that they could make more profits.
I don't think people are educating themselves, says Sunny Hostin, and goes on to spew a bunch of nonsense talking points that all the copium leftoids keep saying. The first one, that inflation is actually a worldwide problem. Yeah, well, you know why it's a worldwide problem? Because frankly, stupidity is a worldwide problem. Most governments acted the exact same way. The idea that that's a defense is ridiculous. We absolutely destroyed our economy here, but so what? It doesn't really matter. It's not a problem here, really, because it's a problem everywhere else. This is a nonsense talking point, and it's the most copium of coke. Yet leftoids keep regurgitating this one over and over again because they think it makes them sound smart. Oh, well, I understand macroeconomics. No, clearly you don't. Because if you did, then you'd understand that what Western nations and Asian nations did, absolutely decimating our supply chains, is probably the biggest factor behind the inflation crisis, next to energy policy. Every single factor behind inflation can be tracked directly to a Biden policy and left-wing policies in general. Whether it's the endless money printer, the printer go burr, and the stimulus injected into the economy, Joe Biden's constant attacks on energy production and energy production expansion, and of course the supply chain disruptions by shutting down entire fields of business and then stopping people from getting back to work due to the government not being happy with their private medical decisions. All of it can be traced directly to Sleepy Joe. So to claim that it's a worldwide phenomenon is a ridiculous argument. Then we get into the communist argument. The domestic problem of inflation is due to corporate greed. This is what I keep hearing from everyone. It's price gouging. It's price gouging, they say. Now, is there an element of price gouging? Maybe. In certain cases, sure. But for the most part, it's just companies reacting to the current economic environment. You know, Coca-Cola, for instance, is viewed as a great hedge against inflation, a great company to buy during a recession or during an inflation crisis, because Coca-Cola and and all of their diverse retail products don't seem to really take a hit in sales during inflationary times, and the costs of their products are pretty low, so it's very easy for them to just increase the cost by 10 to 15% and meet inflation where it's at, increase their profit margins, and they just keep trucking along. I'm using this as an example because this is just what companies have to do in inflationary times. If the cost of energy, services, and labor is increasing, then companies have to increase the price of their goods. Then leftoids keep bringing up all kinds of arguments. Well, what about oil? 10, 15 years ago, the price of a barrel spiked up to $100, but gas prices weren't nearly as expensive as they are now. Oil companies must just be gouging the consumer. Well, again, not exactly, because everything else has gotten more expensive. The cost of crude oil is just the beginning, and now the cost of getting that crude oil refined and to the consumer has become more expensive. There's more regulatory burden, there's more taxes, a lot of government intervention that's trying to slow down the consumption of oil. Not to mention, in the Western world, we currently have a refinery shortage, because again, governments, like in California as we've previously covered, governments are getting in the way of expanding refinery infrastructure and capabilities. So it's more expensive to transport, there's higher taxes, there's more regulations, there's a refinery shortage, and there's an increase in demand in general, which the supply is now lagging behind. Then leftoids say, well then, what about hotels and housing? Hotel prices are through the roof. Well, what do you think happened over the last 2 years? The tourism industry got shut down by governments across the Western world. They lost nearly 2 years of generating revenue. So now, of course, hotels have to increase their prices in order to make up for the losses and the debts that they accrued over that time. It's not price gouging, it's literal survival. The same thing with airline tickets, and the list goes on and on and on. At the end of the day, the corporations aren't to blame here. It's the government that constantly gets in their way with all the taxes, the regulatory burden, and the most egregious offenses, which liberals conveniently seem to omit from most of these arguments or most of these discussions. The fact that governments paid people not to work, so there was a worker shortage and a labor shortage. Governments shut down people's business, forced companies and industries to fire people who didn't adhere to the medical tyranny, and forced companies to abide by specific regulations to install plexiglass and do all of this other nonsense throughout the pandemic, which hurt productivity, hurt their bottom line, and the only way these businesses can survive is by increasing prices moving forward. I mean, it's so ridiculous how leftist talking points and the leftist discussion around these issues is completely void of any nuance whatsoever. It always boils down to one thing. Oh, my corporate greed, my capitalism bad, evil corporations. That's not an argument. They have absolutely no understanding of macro and microeconomic factors. They don't understand the way money works, the way business works, the way the economy works, yet they all talk as if they're friggin' experts. Here's another great example from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with Chris Hayes on MSNBC.
Our inflation is not going up due to government policies. Inflation is going up due to Wall Street decisions.
Inflation is not going up due to government policy, she says. It's going up due to Wall Street decisions. What does that even mean? I just went through a whole list of why government policies led to the current inflationary crisis. And there's actual logic and sound ideas that make sense that support my argument. Oh, my Wall Street bad. It's not government's fault. My Wall Street bad. How does that even make sense? Wall Street is currently suffering right now because of inflation. I mean, that's what we're seeing with all of these dead cat bounces, these bear rallies. Wall Street is on the edge of their seat, waiting for the Fed to flip, to turn around, and to stop with the interest rate hikes. They have been praying to the money gods for inflation to slow down so they could start making money again. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is telling you that Wall Street, a group of people who want inflation to go away more than anybody else, those are the guys who created inflation through Wall Street decisions. I'm not even sure what that means. All Wall Street does is speculate on stocks and commodities, government policies and currencies. They play a reaction and prediction game where they place money based on decisions that are being made by governments and companies. Yet Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, with her fancy economics degree, shows up on MSNBC in front of probably 1 million people watching and just says this stuff, and all of the vote blue no matter who, blue anon leftoids with zero economic understanding are sitting there in front of the TV going, wow, yes, makes sense, Wall Street bad, capitalism evil. And they wonder why regular people who are paying attention to markets and paying attention to the economy and have a basic rudimentary understanding of economics don't want anything to do with them. It's not a mystery, folks. These people are economically illiterate. They understand nothing. Once you get a basic education on common sense in the real world, it is literally impossible to align yourself with these neo-communists. Impossible. The left wants to keep you dumb and uneducated, hopeless and dependent, because if you learn the basic things that you need to not only survive, but to thrive, if you have a basic understanding of money and finances, well, the Democrat Party's leftoids as a political entity, frankly, just wouldn't exist. Period. That's what I got for you guys, though. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel if you guys are up for it. I'm gonna get out of here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.